Hey everybody, John Mark here. I have with me today the one and only Kurt Doolittle. He shot me a note today and said, "Hey John, would you be willing to put out a video in a pretty timely fashion because there's some things that I think the audience needs to understand about the political situation, not just in America and the West, but worldwide, some things that are going to happen that are inevitable, that are deterministic, and what those events are going to mean for us and what they mean for us right now as grassroots right-wingers." So, Kurt, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it off to you, and if I have a question or a clarification that I think might help me or the audience, I'll feel free to jump in, but I'll just go ahead and give you the floor and let you share what is very important for us to understand right now, given the political situation that we have.
Thanks, John, and a really extra big thanks for fitting me into your schedule on a short notice. I was listening to your piece with what is it called? Candace Owens and
Michelle Malkin.
Michelle Malkin, and you were discussing how the right was shifting. But I wanted to. I'm not sure why it came. Why I felt it. I don't know why it drove me to say I think we need to position the horizon better for the audience so that they understand the choices they're making, and maybe that we're getting close to where we're going to need the audience to maybe help a little bit in the right in general, help a little bit in bringing about whatever choice we make. And so to do that, I want to. We tend to get wrapped up in the excitement of the moment. In other words, whatever the news is going on, because we're extremely sensitive about this coming transfer of power, where we're no longer going to be able to have power.
And you're talking about in electoral politics in America specifically. Is that what you're referring to?
Right.
Okay.
And so since this is coming up, and we know it, the left knows it, and Trump is our sort of, either he's our opportunity to bring it to a head, or he's the last gasp of our civilization.
Because of immigration, just in case there's any audience that's new, it's immigrants
Right. It's
vote
just
70% left or more, so we're not going to be able to win elections very soon. So that's what you're referring to.
You know, democracy in the sense that we mean it, which is that within the limits of the system the founders set up that would create a majority middle-class civilization, governed by a rule of law, people of a Christian background. Well, that'll either come to an end or shortly, or we're going to do something about it. Now, I'm going to put I took some notes, but I didn't write this out ahead of time, so I'm going to ask you and the audience to forgive me, because I'm not really sure which order I should tell the story in. I'm going to start with the big question before I get into the history, economics, and the choices of the future. And that is, do you really think that European peoples are just culturally different, or are we culturally, civilizationally different? In other words, are we genetically predisposed to have certain personality traits that we demonstrate in social circumstances that evidence themselves as our civilization, or not? If you don't believe that, that's partly okay. We can either take the genetic distribution or the cultural distribution, or it's both. Whichever one of those three positions you want to take, I'm pretty sure it's both. And say that, well, if other people could adopt the Western civilization's methods, they would have. If other people could have evolved them, they would have. But nobody actually even came close, other than perhaps the Japanese. And so I'm going to say that that has to be in your mind, is that can the contributions that, in other words, can the sacrifices that our ancestors have made, the investments in our generation and the generation before us that made, and the returns we want for future generations to maintain from this civilization, persist without without either our genetics or our genetics in concert with our culture making this civilization possible. And so I'm going to throw that out there as I said, you have to make that whatever way you look at it, sort of like my argument about whether, does it matter if you're a theological Christian, a spiritual Christian, a rational, traditional Christian, or like me, a scientific Christian? Does it really make any difference if we all do the same thing? Well, it's somewhat similar to the same argument, is that whether you assume it's genetic, you assume it's cultural, institutional, or you assume it's both, it really doesn't make much difference. The question is, do you think it can persist without the dominance of our people and the persistence of our institutions to make it persist? So you have to answer that question for yourself. I'm just going to say it actually doesn't matter, because it's very hard for you to say that our way of life will persist without both. So in any event, so that's just the question I wanted to put. I thought I might hold out to last, that I want to keep in mind while I go through the rest of this. So most of the time, again, we get caught up in this the noise, right? And we get caught up in the recent history, and so most of the time we sort of forecast based on our experience. We don't tend to forecast on longer experience. We don't tend to forecast on the experience or the practices of civilizations across the ages, and we tend not to have the knowledge of economics and demographics, and where technology is part of economics, that allow us to look at the past and compare it to the present by other than relatively moral rather than empirical means. So if I stage that a little bit, I've stated two basic questions. One is there's a decision we're going to have to make, whether you believe our civilization is unique and successful because of genetic, cultural, or both circumstances, and that we tend to look at the short term. I want to make sure that those three are there, and because what I'm going to try to do is show you the next 50 to 75 years and the consequences and the choice we have to make. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me, Kurt. I think you set it up very, very well. I don't really have any other questions at this time. I think you said it very well, and I think I just want to drive home the point that, and I heard someone else say this the other day as well, the next several years of what we do is going to lay the foundation and be a determining factor for the foreseeable future, for years and years, decades, centuries even.
Right. So I'm going to pull from, I wanted to not have this be simply Kurt pulling stuff from my database, but I wanted you to pull things from people who you can go look to. So I'm going to refer to other people who have who also know this information. I want you to understand that there are think tanks around the world who put out papers every day. Right, and that's their job. They're guys. They're not unlike me. They tend to be focused on some sector that's empirical rather than like oil or military or import-export or finance. They tend to be, but these papers come out. This stuff gets consolidated by a group of people who are called geostrategists, and they tend to try to say, okay, how is each of these things going to affect the other? Right, and so we are coming to a place right now where there's we perceive as a shift in the in local demographics that's causing us a problem, is coinciding with a global reorganization of economics and technology and power and demographic, and it is also coming into conflict with a global demographic shift. And so once we understand what's going to happen here, that we don't have any choice, and then we understand what unique combination our civilization and our culture and I'm going to say our genetics do have, and the American continent. I want to say show that there's there are only so many choices we have, and a couple of they're better than you'd think. All right, so they are better than you think as long as we choose, right? We choose to act on them, and we're going to have to at some point say we're going to act on one of these choices. So so let's start back with creating what scenario we're in, and we sort of had this age of empires, right? The colonial period. There's nothing special about the colonial period except that during the age of sail, we could tie the continents together in ways we couldn't tie before, right? There was the Silk Road before that, right? There was Mediterranean trade, and there's been trade across Eurasia forever. There's been trade in East Asia forever. There's been trade domestically and along the shores of India forever. And I mean, the first place trade probably evolved of any merit is probably today's space between Yemen and Africa. So, you know, the idea that there's something special about this age of empires is not really true. It's simply that sail made the age of sail made it possible for us to do this on a global level. And but there's not really any difference between, let's say, the Persian Empire at its height and, you know, the British Empire at its height. Right. What's different, what's the same in all those cases that's different today is in all those cases when each civilization polices its own trade routes. Does that make sense? Yes. And the same thing happened with the Age of Sail. Is Britain had its colonies, and it took resources from colonies, brought them back home, transformed them, and sold them resold them as a profit at profit, right? Well, the same was for France and even everybody, Spain, and so and that system blew up. But when it blew up, it blew up really badly because we'd invented, you know, artillery, steel, and high explosives and chemistry. And so, you know, we had a pretty big explosive there over the 30 years of war that we call the World Wars, which is really the European Civil War. And the only guy left standing is the United States. And so what we do is we bring everybody together and said, tell you what. Because remember, in our standpoint, Europeans are the warmongering, troublesome people that have always been caused difficulty in the world, right? We don't think about that anymore because we're the people who do that now. But in the past, that was Europeans. All right. But we ended up saying, okay, we're going to take this over, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to let you. We're going to control the world pattern of finance and trade, right? So we're going to create the largest mall in the universe, which is the whole planet, and that and you're all going to be able to shop in that mall, and you're not going to have to pay for defense or rent, right? And we'll give you access to our market and exchange. You can open up. You know, you'll get you'll have the ability to sell products, and you could rebuild. Well, you know, that works. You know, that worked really well. You know, we set up these rules. We paid for it. We had places to sell, and people don't think this way because the Americans during the 50s think they were wonderful, but really they were selling pretty crappy goods at high prices to a world that had fallen apart, right? And so we get into we get through that period, and then what happens is we say, okay, well, excuse me, and then we say, well, because we need to fight communism. Right.
So you're talking about, just to make sure everybody's tracking, you're talking about after World War I and after World War II. That's what you just said applies. And then it's the next challenge is communism.
Right. And so we said, if you do that, we'll fight communism. But we need you guys to rebuild. And so they rebuilt, you know, and we fought communism. And they rebuilt, and we kept paying.
You're talking about the rest of Europe that was devastated, rebuilt, and other parts of the world rebuilding while we're fighting communism. Yeah,
and then, you know, communism ended, and we kept paying, and then we had the well, people don't like it when I say this, but we had this second Jewish attempt to destroy Western civilization with Marxism, with postmodernism, and the financialization and propaganda. So that's what's going on in our schools, and so we're internally being undermined. Meanwhile, we're fighting communism v3, which is Islamism.
And then the other point you made there that I want to make sure to draw out is the United States specifically is still paying for things that it originally made sense to pay for, and now it doesn't make sense anymore to do that. Did I catch that correctly?
Yeah, I'm just going to make it worse. And so we're keeping paying. Now, the problem is that when you're 3/4 of the world economy, Christian charity is plus with geostrategy turns out to be a pretty good thing. And, people don't think about it this way, but the way our promise to the world was, and where the idea of human rights comes from, is that if you stay inside your borders and take care of your people, then do whatever you want. What we want to do is the American strategy post-war was raise everyone to be a good commercial global citizen. Mm-hmm. That means focus on the development of your people, maintain inside your borders, and become a good player on the world stage. That was our goal. We didn't say the stick, though, which is, yes, democracy is a good thing. No, it's actually a horrible thing, which has pretty much been, that was figured out by the mid-90s, the popular. We just love our democracy so much as a religion. We haven't. The rest of the world has sort of left us behind. But we've been told the world to love democracy. They said, well, that doesn't really work because the minute you get democracy, you get consumerism, and the minute you get consumerism, you get hedonism, and we don't want any of we don't want any of that bad stuff that you Western people do.
So you're saying there's other nations that are rejecting democracy for the reasons you're describing here.
Right, because it's too much license.
Yes.
Right, and so the second thing we didn't say is, and when you choose democracy, every people should have the right of self-determination, except don't choose poorly. In other words, we didn't tell them the flip side of, yeah, you can choose democracy as long as you don't choose poorly. Well, they chose what was in their interest, right? They chose what they understood, which was they wanted to defend themselves from the kind of hedonism we've exported. They don't want what we have. A lot of us don't want what we have. Mm-hmm. So,
yes.
They want, the rest of the world wants familism, right? And the left, beginning in the 60s, promoted individualism. Now, we've had sovereignty, but we've never had individualism. We've always had familism, and what happened in the 60s is they brought in individualism as a means of undermining familism. Mm. All right, so in any event, so we're at the end of this period, and we've done all this stuff, and it's turned out that now we don't have 70% of the world economy. And as a matter of fact, we've got competitors all over the place, and unlike the past where we had all these dependencies, we don't think about it that way. But when we talk about foreign trade coming into America, it doesn't mean anything. We've outsourced our cheap labor to Mexico. Basically, they're a client state pretty much. We had to rule them like one, we'd be better off, but they're fundamentally a client state for a low labor. We have resources up in Canada, although Canada is bordering on a competitor or an enemy at most times. And we don't really look at the rest of the world. We could cut off the rest of the world entirely, and our entire economy would adapt and absorb it in a couple of years. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. So when you say that trade from the rest of the world doesn't really matter, you're basically saying we're very self-sufficient in America.
Yeah, look at France worked at it on purpose. Why do you think they built all those nuclear reactors? Because when that oil crisis happened back in the 70s, they realized that means we're ruled by whoever sells us oil.
Yes.
And we're French, and we're not going to let that happen. And the French are pretty good at that stuff. And for the fact that they're the enemy of Europe, they on the other hand, they understand self-sufficiency.
Yes.
So they have gone. So we're in a situation where we are oil independent, I mean, at this point, what people don't realize is that we can gas, like the gas you burn, right, to run your house, it's actually a waste product. We have so much of it. The only reason we don't throw it in the air is because the government won't let us. But essentially, it's free. So we're oil independent, and it's only going to get better. Now, and we're also trade independent, and we're food independent.
Yes.
Which is not something anybody else can say very easily. So we have this, because we have this wonderful thing called the Mississippi River system. Center of the country is basically can feed the whole planet. And we've got this wonderful island we're on, right? This whole continent is this enormous island, and if we were smart enough to either rule Mexico or build a wall between us, and then build a wall at the bottom of Mexico there, so that we wouldn't have anybody cut off, we'd have a pretty good autarkic place here.
Yes.
So I want to position that importantly, because the rest of the world has none of those things.
That's a very powerful point. Yes.
The rest of the world has none of those things.
Wow.
So it's see, we don't need a blue water navy to, or to police the world. We don't have any reason to keep the Middle East in peace, or to keep Russia out of Eastern Europe, or Europe for that matter.
Because it just doesn't affect us. You're saying it wouldn't affect us. Yeah, we're fine either way. It doesn't
matter at all, right? And so when Trump says America first, this is where he's coming from.
Yes.
So the only person he treats as his equal is the guy who runs these trade negotiations for him. And he's right, because Trump's reorganizing the world so that they're no longer preying on us.
Yes, even going over to Europe and saying, you guys have to pay your fair share of NATO at least, because Big Daddy USA is paying for your military defense, that type of thing.
And it's, the real reason is they talk shit about us, and they instill our left with the idea that we should have the stuff that they have because we're paying for their defense.
Correct. They're lying, yes.
Right. And so what happens is that it spins up our people who want to have the stuff they have over there, but they can't. They only have over there because we're paying for their defense.
Correct. They couldn't afford it if they had to pay for their own defense.
Well, and they're not going to be able to afford it much longer. So let's look at the rest of the world, all right? So the Chinese. Let's do the. So show you with it. I'm going to stay with economics first before I go to anything else.
This is good, by the way, Kurt. I'm tracking with you. I think the audience is going to be tracking with you, Sue. Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, by the way, there is nothing I'm saying here so far. There's nothing I'm going to say here that isn't common knowledge in the upper strategic understanding of finance, governments around the world.
Yes.
There's nothing here that I'm not saying anything that's remotely revolutionary.
That's right.
It's just exactly what everybody knows, right? There's nothing here. And it's nothing you couldn't go out and find a video on, right? There's nothing you couldn't go out and find the papers on, or even pull up, basic financial information and demographic information.
Yes.
The problem is you can't look at financial information without looking at demographic information, because the finances are a representation of the present, given the present demographics.
Yes.
But those finances change rapidly with future demographics. Right? So now you got them again. So I'm going to reiterate. America, we're in this place of, we don't fucking need you people. Actually, you're a pain in our ass, and we got problems at home. So we're a global empire. We're a domestic empire. And we're not, and our people domestically aren't happy about us being a domestic empire even.
And a doormat for the rest of the world to come and.
Well, I mean, the right isn't. The left loves it, because the left has bought into the Disney world, the Disney fantasy, which is it's a small world after all, right? And it's not a small world. Immigration really is what ended it.
Yes.
Everybody was happy with internationalization of trade, right? They weren't so happy with the internationalization of democracy, but that sort of ended already.
Mm-hmm.
But they're happy with the international trade. That's pretty good. Although for Americans, we shipped those jobs overseas, and that probably wasn't a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, but all of a sudden, you start having immigration, and all of a sudden you're having an attack on your family, your friends, your nation, and your identity, and the historical. We don't think of it this way, but our consciousness is built to. Excuse me. The thing we measure is debt. And we don't think of it that way, but we think of it as soul or good or whatever, but it's debt. And we don't like that this debt is people are eating away at our assets.
Yes.
So, we had a very short period of globalization there, a couple of decades. Mm-hmm. But they built this wonderful mythos. And we had the neocons on the right, and we had the equal globalists on the left building this one world fantasy.
Yes.
As if genetics, culture and demographics don't matter.
As if it doesn't matter. That's right.
So we had this little window here. And, we had the EU, the WTO, the one world government. And people think this is like, it's some trajectory. No, it was a luxury of the United States winning the war against communism and everybody else getting on board.
And the U.S. had no competition after that because every other advanced country basically was devastated.
We're a superpower, so what happens? Everybody gets excited like, oh, the problem's over. No, it isn't. The problem's it just means that period is over. We're going back to normal.
Yes.
So,
and the demographics don't stop mattering. Yep.
Demographics is destiny.
Yes.
Demographics is destiny. The problem is getting people to go from demographics as destiny to class distribution and trait distribution. Those demographics is destiny.
Yes.
So you have to say, well, it's one demographics is destiny when you have a consumption-driven economy. Demographics is destiny when you have an export-driven economy. But demographics isn't destiny when you're Japan and you say, we're going to stay homogenous. We're going to automate all the jobs that we possibly can. So we're not going to export jobs. We're going to maintain them here. We're not going to import labor. We're going to replace the need for labor.
Yes.
So that's our first choice. Why are we bringing in people we don't need when we could do that and follow the Chinese method? The Japanese method. There's no reason we should automate as much as we can instead of fear automation. Well, that'll be fine as long as we don't bring in hordes of underclasses.
Uh-huh.
All right, so I'm going to go back to the nation state. So what happened is that period of one world ended, and what happened is 300 years of European technological, and cultural, institutional advantage disappeared.
Yes.
Right. And so the rest of the world sort of caught up here. So what's the competitive difference between all different parts of the world? You need a competitive difference in order to provide something better that someone can want, right? You have to have that.
Yes.
Well, our competitive difference in European people now is just our institutions and our genes.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Because the rest of the world can easily copy technology. Is that kind of what you're saying? So the institutions and the genes
They can't copy our genes, and they can't copy our behavior, and they can't copy our institutions.
Yes.
I mean, I say that. Well, look at the South Koreans. Well, honestly, they did a pretty damn good job. They're a small, homogenous population with equally advanced genetics.
Yep.
Look at the Japanese. They're a small, homogenous population with equally advanced genetics and probably as good or better social order.
Yes.
Right? And so they can't do certain things we can. But let's not get into that kind of nonsense. I mean, frankly, what's the difference between between us is we're a little more dominant than dominant expression than they are.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So anyway, what have I got to here? Which things have I touched on? I just touched on the fact that the equilibration is gone. Right. So I said the advantage is gone. The demographics and culture are the only advantage we have left, and the left is trying to destroy demographics and culture.
Yes.
Right. So they're trying to destroy the only thing we have left.
Yes.
It's for the same reason they don't really understand that these institutions they think it's like a momentum, that it continues without the underlying structure, the underlying habits that made it possible.
Like it's just magically there and it will continue to be there.
When that, it's the fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, it's just as easily as to see that. So
yes.
Let's go. So I've opened up a bunch of directions right now. Hopefully I'm creating this idea that there's a lot of variables going on.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happened is we're all sort of saying, well, there's no competitive advantage anymore. In other words, the economic thing doesn't work. Demographic immigration doesn't work, and cultural integration doesn't work. So everybody's reverting to the nation state again. So look at who are the declining nations and who are the rising. Well, Japan is the most rising nation that there is, socially stable, ethnically homogenous, and they have chosen automation and commons over financialism and consumption. Turkey is, again, they're frustrating us, but we should take our nukes out of there. But Turkey's going nationalist again. It has, and it's going to do just fine doing that.
Yes.
Right. So there's declining nations. Russia is still in decline. Myself, as you probably know, I want to stop that. I want to help them stop that. Japan, and China is a declining nation.
And they're declining because?
Well, it's the biggest bubble in history, and they were not able to use their financialism didn't go to changing the people. Does that make sense? They didn't. I mean, I don't know if you watch the guys who live over there that do those videos, but I mean, there's there's videos every day of some kid getting kidnapped in the middle of the street, right? And everybody just keeps on walking, or somebody gets run over by something and they just keep on walking, or a woman gets pulled right off a path in a park and raped in the bushes, and people keep walking by. So they didn't fix the people. And they weren't able to get a lot of the people into the country, but they weren't able to turn it into a domestic consumption market. So they're entirely export dependent.
Okay.
Well, who else is entirely export dependent? Germany's a great example. In fact, right? So what happens? How far is Italy? Italy's almost as far gone as China and Greece. So how do you fix that problem? Well, you're not. What's holding it together? Well, the promise of the EU and Germany. But what's Germany's problem? Is they're having a demographic collapse. So it's not like one of those situations where, gee, this is a risk. Does it make sense? They're all risk. There are risks everywhere.
Yes. It's kind of multiple layers of risk almost, yeah.
Because the order that we've put in place over the period, because there were such asymmetries of cultural, demographic, institutional knowledge, technological differences, has been largely equilibrated, at least in relation to demographics. And worse, the places that least needed to have large population increases have, and the places that least needed to have demographic collapses have.
So the demographics are have been going the opposite direction that they need to, and if I'm catching the picture you're painting correctly, there are multiple risks. The situation we have is very fragile, I guess you could say.
It's fragile, and that's where we come to the interesting ideas. So, so Canada's the same problem. Let me see if I can get anybody else here. Canada's also in the same problem. They're an export economy. They're a client state, but they're somewhat hostile. So what happened? The Brexit's going on, the EU's probably dead, etc. So the developed world's population has sort of crashed, and it's actually not recoverable. There's actually nothing you can do. This means that we're because most of the world except for us is export driven, and because they have demographic collapses, we are going to have a financial and economic crash.
Okay, so
it's not a question of. It's only a question of how quickly.
Okay, so it's going to happen, and you're saying it's because the developed countries specifically are not having enough babies, because as they become more economically advanced, the birth rates collapse, and then the reaction of the globalist elites is, let's import people from the third world, which is exactly the opposite of what you want to do. Am I kind of catching that correctly?
That's what they want to do, because they want to keep the money rolling.
Sure.
Which is why, I don't know if you've touched on this with the people yet, but this is why we always talk about reciprocity, but the most influential program I've put out is definancialization.
Yes. Right? Talking about policies in, for example, the Proprietarian Constitution is getting the finance people so they're not running everything and having all this power.
That they're not what they're really doing is between the academy and the financial sector, and the import of the unskilled, lower class labor, the dependent labor, most of which is on some sort of dependency. What they're doing is they are genetically crushing the ethnic European middle class.
Yes.
And so I want to stop that and flip it around the other way, and the trillions they're extracting from our people
in the form of debt. Yes. Go back to our people. Yes.
Right. And we pull it out of the world economy. And part of that is because there's nowhere to put it anyway. Does that make sense? There's so much capital right now looking for an investment, they can't find it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that's because we're pulling too much out, but there's nowhere to put it.
Uh-huh. So why not put it back into the genetic capital? Correct.
So that's actually, when I say people, there's some technical parts of my work that are just hard, and that's the strict construction of law is actually hard. The definancialization is equally as difficult. The thing is, it's difficult to understand if you don't understand economics, but it's not that difficult to actually implement, and the change will be rapid. And so I want to make sure I've just connected the dots.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to do it. Does that make sense? What I'm proposing isn't, hey, let's do it to punish the financial sector. We have to do it because that money isn't going anywhere anyway. It can't.
And if we don't, there's going to be a collapse.
Right,
of some sort.
It's going to be a collapse anyway, so why not direct it to where it needs to be?
Uh-huh.
Right? So let's see.
So all these fragile dominoes that are out there are they're all dependent on us. The financialization basically has all this capital with nowhere to go, and so let's fix that part of it and put that back into our genetic capital, I guess you could say.
Make it basically easy for people to have one-income families that can have
kids.
Kids.
Instead of being debt slaves from the cradle to the grave. Makes sense.
Right, which is the academy does, right? Between the academy and the financial sector, it's just a meat grinder. And then people talk about cities. Cities are shit. They're a freaking genetic meat grinder because a child in the city is a liability.
Yes.
Now, you can either do what the Germans did, which they did structure cities a little bit better, so that it's a little bit better, but it still didn't help them. So the question is, how do we? I've answered that. I don't want to get into cures. I'm trying to stay on topic here.
Sure.
Which is again, this has to crash. Our productivity has flattened. In other words, we have to have something to devote investment to that will produce a return.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have anything. Cars went and then they went away, and the chipper's gone and now it's gone away. Again, everybody's saying the same thing. There's nothing big. We keep hoping for the next big thing, like it's going to be batteries or medical or whatever, but we haven't found it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have. It's sitting right in front of us. It's genes.
Yes.
Right. It's the innovation we need isn't consumption driven. It's capital creation.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And just for some context for the audience as well, this is information that Kurt and I and people like us kind of take for granted. But if you're just wondering about, why are we saying genes is so important, just go read a book by Dr. Garrett Jones called, what's it called? The Hive Mind: Why Your Nation's IQ is so much more important than your own. And so basically what we're talking about is if you look at a map of the average IQ of different nations, and please understand when we say this does not mean every individual in these nations has that IQ. It just means that different groups of people have different percentages of their people group with an IQ below say 90 or so. So if your average IQ in your nation isn't close to 100 or above, it's basically impossible to have a first world nation. And so what we're doing in America, what we've been talking about is we're making it very hard for the higher IQ people, the middle class people, to have babies. We're redistributing that money to the people with lower IQs. This is the cardinal sin of a civilization. So I'm giving you kind of a mouthful if you've never heard it before, but this is something that is well known in real social science circles.
Okay, so the other thing is that Europeans, I don't know what does WEIRD stand for? White, educated,
industrialized?
Yeah, a white, industrialized, educated democracy. Is that what it is? Yeah.
It's an acronym, WEIRD, yes.
Yeah, it's an acronym for weird, and it basically means us. And so the problem is also that we tend to go to IQ, but IQ is a personality trait. It's a function of how your brain is put together. But you have other personality traits.
Yes.
There aren't a lot of them that matters, a limited number of variables, and they're because of various structures of your brain. But just like you have different breeds of dogs, humans are similar to the different breeds of dogs with different tendencies in their behavior, and we tend to take it for granted, and we've known it for a while, but we needed the genetics to prove it, and finally it's coming out that we're actually pretty weird as humans go. In other words, we've been in a genetic meat grinder of our own for a long time, and it's tended to produce the egalitarian nature of our species that is very different from the familial low trust the personality of everybody else on the planet. So you can't really create our civilization and the goods of our civilization without these things. And a lot of my work is explaining why that happens in the economic, velocity, trust, and how rapid we adapt, protection of commons. So all these things are necessary, but they're part of our genetics as well. So I don't want to get it. If you want to get into superiority, that's probably not the right answer. But if you want to say we have done a better job of filtering out traits that put demand for family and low productivity, we filtered those things out. And so that's why one of the reasons we tend to be here. So again, I don't want to get stuck on the genetics because we turn people off without hearing the whole story here. So I'm not really quite at the end of the argument, so I'd like to get there.
Yeah,
so
go for it.
You were trying to summarize that, yeah, it matters. It matters that your whole population has an IQ of 105, like what is China right now, if the numbers are true, or if you're 115, which is where we were in pre-Victorian England, and we've already lost 15 points, which is a standard deviation. That's huge. I mean,
yes.
What's the cost of that? And right now we're below 100 in the United States, which means at 97, it gets difficult to have an advanced economy. And at somewhere below 95, it gets almost impossible. When you start getting down into third world country status, you have to have this distribution because all those people below that number create a friction on everybody else. It's not so much that people are better. It's that the people who are further down are a cost that can't be compensated for.
Yes.
All right. So anyway, so productivity is faster. We don't need anyone. We don't hardly import anything. We're shifted, but here's where we're getting to our choices. So what's happening is we've been the greatest support of stability in the world. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And we're moving into the greatest source of instability.
You're talking about America specifically.
America specifically, because this stuff doesn't matter to us anymore. They've, between the left undermining our civilization and focusing us inward, the immigration undermining us and focusing us on internal conflict, and the demographic shift where people like us are trying to preserve this for our posterity. We're doing what Trump is an example of, is we're saying, yeah, but I know you like all this stuff and these freebies, but sorry, you got to pay your own way. We got our own problems now.
Yes. And
so we're becoming a sort. Now this sounds we're just getting started here. So the stability of those global markets, when we're autarkic, stability of global markets isn't in our interest anymore.
Yes.
In other words, causing chaos in global markets is in our domestic interest now. Right. So if we create we create high oil prices in the rest of the world drive up prices, it doesn't affect us at all. It just means a better export market for us.
Interesting. So you're saying the situation has flipped, whereas before it was in our interest to have stability in global markets. Now it's actually flipped to where it's the opposite, and we can benefit in many cases from even causing chaos or problems for others because we don't need anybody else.
Right. Secondly, we control the global financial system. We can deny countries, companies, or individual transactions access to the global market. Now, they're trying to do something about it, but they really can't. The example George Friedman gives, I think it's George Friedman gives, is that if you call up, might be Friedman, I think it's either Friedman or Zihan, he says the Europeans keep saying that they'll require European trades to be made in euros. And then the U.S. says, well, great, more trades are done in dollars than in euros. So we'll require all trades to be done, all trades to be done in dollars, and that'll just make the euro go out of business. So we own we own this world market. Right now, some people would like to shut off the internet, and I'd surely like to be able to shut China off of our internet. So we could do that, but we control this financial system, and realistically, between chaos and the financial system, we're able to do amazing kinds of warfare. Now we also have the world's only projectable military. Now, my view is the next naval battle we have will be the end of navies, but at present we can still project power. Mostly because we can afford it. China's trying to build up really quickly, and that's the thing China has is even if they're poor, they're a really poor country that's collapsed, they can still direct tons of money to the production of arms. So I see them trying to be another Russia. Right? So, and then let's talk about, we can not only can we, is global instability, and not only do we have control of the financial markets, but we can shut off access to our market. Yes. And so these are four levers we have that are incredibly powerful.
Yes. Yep.
The fifth lever is we have this wonderful thing called food. Right, and we can't even. I mean, we have so much food, our farmers can't make money at it. So I want to just say that Fortress America, if we choose to keep it, is a really wonderful asset. So I don't want people say America's in trouble. No, it's a choice. Because Germany's gone at the next financial crisis. China is gone, right? Yes. The European Union is gone. Yep. Right? These are all gone. India has already turned nationalistic and internal. So the whole Iran, wants to wants to own all the oil there. It's always funny, we had Giorgiani come on and do his crazy man stuff the other day, which, all the historical stuff was good and then he went crazy. But on the other side, the Iranic population isn't southeast in the Arab lands. It's southwest in the Arab lands. It's northeast in Pakistan and Afghanistan. In other words, those are Iranic peoples, not the people, not the. So why isn't Iran focusing on its own people, not the Arabs? Well, it's because they want to dominate the Middle East, whereas I think most of the world would prefer a secular Iran over the Iranic people, and the kingdoms to persist. At least kingdoms in Egypt to persist.
Yes.
So have I painted a picture of the world is extremely fragile.
Yes.
We are internally very politically fragile right now.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have incredible control over that political fragility and what's going to happen with it.
Yes.
We have incredible opportunity to take this country, definancialize it, right, and turn it into the only wealthy place. Now, what is going to happen when the rest of the world falls apart? All the talent in the world goes to where the money is, right?
Yes.
Now, we still have this. We have talent coming in here. So what if we allow talent in, but they can't become citizens? They can't chain migrate. Well, what happens to the world's invention economy?
Collapses.
So they're going to want to come here. There's no reason to turn them away. What we want to do is we want them to fully integrate if we wanted to come. There's only so many elites in the world, right?
You're not talking about hundreds of millions of people here.
We're talking about replacing tens of millions of people we don't need with tens of millions of people who would be really advantageous while we were rebuilding our demographics.
And they can't vote. They're not citizens. They're just helping us dominate competitively.
Yeah. Right. So I want to say there's basically a couple of options available to us. One is, am I holding this together okay?
This is great, Kurt. I mean, I'm tracking. It's making perfect sense to me, and painting a great picture. Okay,
so we can let the left win, which means financialization will continue, the destruction of Western civilization will continue, will be overrun with hordes, both here in the United States and in Europe, which is the intent, right, of the global financial, right, is they are managing an intentional decline because not only is the decline profitable for them, but the decline is their objective. They want to bring about a second fall of the Roman Empire by bringing about the second collapse of the West by repeating the same means. Last time they used religion, and this time they're using outright lying, right? A pseudoscience and lying.
Sure.
They used the false promise of religion before. Now they use the false promise of economic, social, or genetic equality. They can't have it. You can't have it. It's not possible. Whatever.
But they're using that as a tool because that's what they want, because it's profitable for them. The elites I'm talking about.
That's what they do. So we have a choice. We can say, okay, we want to be the world empire. In other words, there's no reason we don't take over, renationalize the government, right? Turn the cities into. In other words, turn the cities into free cities in which they can do whatever they want within limits, and rule the world. Right? That's an option. I don't particularly care for it, but there's certainly some right-wing guys who think that's a lot of fun, and I'm not sure the military would object too much. We can say, let's not be an empire. Let's maintain a domestic empire, or at least a North American empire. Let's maintain our navies and our armies and whatever, and let's focus them on continental superiority. Let the world fall apart around us, and it'll slowly recover, and things will return to normal, and we'll be relatively autarkic because this is a really big fucking island, and with a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we can do that if we again nationalize the organs of government, which basically means we would make all the changes I'm talking about, but you would have to be a ethnic European citizen in order to hold office.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's certainly African Americans who've earned their place. I mean, I'm not
sure.
I'm talking about you got to be a good citizen and you conform. We can force conformity and integration no matter what you are. We can force that. We can break the thing up.
Mm.
We can break it up into regional city-states. We can turn the United States back into a Council of Europe. In other words, just like Europe used to be, as a collection of small states. I mean, that's what a lot of travelers of Europe realize when they come here. Wow, every state's just a little country. You just don't call it a country.
Yes.
And so every state in America is basically its own country. We could fix that, and we could end DC's parasitism on the rest of the states and redistribute all the talent that's in that area to all the states, and you would have a rebirth of innovation on a scale that I don't think we've seen since the development of type in our printing presses. So I think there's a lot of choices available here. The only choice that's bad is letting the enemy win.
Yes.
So what I wanted to take away, that we're screwed. I mean, everybody who's following us, I am absolutely dead certain that it's possible to reform this government. Absolutely possible. Because what will happen if we don't is all that stuff that I just mentioned about the world, it's going to happen. The chaos will be intolerable, and it's really easy to bring that out, and all it does is make it easier for us. And you know what? People know that. What we have to do is we have to know which of those three or four things we want to do, and we have to understand that we are sitting on Fortress America is a beautiful, luxurious thing that we need only stop saying, oh, it's going to be okay, someone else will take care of it. We got to man up and do it.
I love that, Kurt. I just want to recap, because I was taking notes as you went through your options. Just to recap briefly for the audience, what I wrote down, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Kurt, but option 1, let the left win. Well, obviously, we don't want to do that. Option 2, be a kind of a world empire. Option 3 would be more of a domestic empire. And option 4 would be to break up into kind of regional city-states and small states. And any of those last 3 options could work for us, and it's just option 1 that we absolutely don't want to let happen.
And the only thing we have to preserve in all 3 is we have to preserve the military as a continental force. The reason being, we can't let another enemy gain traction on the territory.
Yes.
On the island. And so that's the requirement. The rest of it's just a matter of what do you want to do. So I'm going to talk mostly about. I think you and I are sort of going to hit on this stuff. I mean,
yes.
John drives this, right? I'm just the talking puppet head.
No, I was going to ask you if you want to start recording these next week but going through the Proprietarian Constitution you're talking about, right, Kurt?
Yeah, and so I'm taking the position that of domestic, that we deal with domestic. A domestic empire, so to speak, and that we devolve the government down to out of the business of social norms, and so that the states or the regions of the cities can go our normative ways while we can't strategically influence each other. And so I'm going to go that direction. I just want to point out that that's a choice, because I think it provides the greatest opportunity to explain what's possible to people. So whereas if you say we want to maintain the domestic empire, let's take it. For example, getting Alberta right now is trivial, right? We could go get Alberta right now, and then after Alberta, we end up with everything except Ontario and actually probably Toronto. We'd probably get the rest of Ontario and Quebec, right?
Yes.
We'd eventually get everything, which is fine. Mexico was a matter of, well, we really kind of want to keep them over there on the other side, but we could influence, we could play the game of bringing rule of law into Mexico. So if you want to make a continental empire, we certainly can do that. If you want to maintain, which our military does, there's some people in America that really do want to invest in the military and maintain the global ownership of the patterns of trade. I can't see into that well enough. There are people who can. I can't see into the well. That's not my area. But I don't see a whole lot of value in getting involved in everybody's mess. It never worked in the past. We've ended. Once we end, we've ended. We'll end the Jewish invasion pretty shortly. In other words, we'll end financialization and false promise pretty shortly. We can end Islamization as easily, and after that, it's just the rest of the world realizing we've got to contain Semitia to Semitia because they're the only troublemakers in the world, and the rest of us just happily get along.
Yes,
I don't really see why the balance of civilizations is going to be any problem. I mean, we're going to have the normal conflicts over intermediaries, the borderlands, but fundamentally, we're the major civilizations are essentially different races, and we're fine if we with our own. So
yes.
Anyway, so did I do?
Yes.
Did I make my point here about what the world looks like? And that we don't really get a choice. That this stuff is going to happen, so we can either be the victims of it or we can take control of it. Our control is we can't. If we take control, we can't pretty much lose. I mean, we have too many assets in our favor as long as we take control of the organs of state.
Yes, and then you did answer the question at the end there that I was going to ask you. Once we let out the 4 options that we have, or the 3 that we would prefer, which one would you prefer? Which one would you maybe recommend might be the word? And so it sounds like when we go through the proprietarian constitution, that really what that's going to be talking about is kind of this model of more breaking up into like the small states and the regional city-states.
I would say that happens either way.
Okay,
it's just,
sure.
You start with there, and then you decide whether you want to go from there. And the reason is I want to deal with institutional problems first, because once you have the institutional problem solved, the goal, the scope of your interest is just whatever. To me, I want to restore the British Empire, the English-speaking peoples. I want us to have the Queen back. The reason is, even if all that Queen, I mean, Australia still has that. Even if all she can do is say, "I'm going to veto that because that's a bad idea." That's because having a monarchy gets rid of ideology.
Judge of last resort. You're not talking about a monarchy that can do whatever they want with no questions asked. You're talking about like a judge of last resort that can veto something, like you just said.
A monarchy has evolved into the place where their real position is to prevent. They have 2 positions. They prevent bad judgments from taking root, and they prevent usurpation of power. In other words, a monarchy has to be able to say, this party or group of people needs to go away, and they have to be able to say this policy has to go away. That's it. They don't have to have any via positiva. They don't have to have the right to. I mean, theoretically, having them involved in the arts is the greatest defense of the arts. In other words, monarchy nobility is a great defender of the arts. And so I have my bias is to have the monarchy maintain titles for those things. In the British model, it seems to be really good. But if you look at countries, if the monarchy has veto over this stuff, you wouldn't have any of this nonsense.
Yes, the power to say no.
Yeah, it's just because even if you read the Iron Law of Oligarchy, right, or any of the studies of democratic processes or any managerial process, is that the process of getting consensus among a large number of people on a particular strategy or outcome can fairly frequently end up with the wrong decision, simply because it's the only way that this can be. The process can be completed. And so you still have to have somebody who says, you have to have a Supreme Court, you have to have because even the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court came up with Roe versus Wade, right? They know they shouldn't have done that. It was a matter for the states. A monarch would have said, yeah, sorry, not happening.
Leave it to the states or whatnot.
Leave it to the states.
Yep.
It's not.
Yep.
This isn't our decision to make.
So what I hope the audience can see here is that Curt Doolittle has really thought through a lot of this. He's obviously extremely well read in the extreme, and he knows what he's talking about.
It's a curse.
It's a curse. Well, it's, I mean, I, for one, very much appreciate it. And, I'm not exaggerating when I say I read Kurt Doolittle's, recommendations and his thoughts behind things, and I find very little to nothing to disagree with, just because it just makes so much gosh darn sense. It's just, so when we go through the Proprietarian Constitution with him, article by article, or however we do it. See, I experienced this, Kurt, because I'll put out a YouTube video, and I can't put all information in one video, right? So
Sure.
people ask, people put comments, they ask questions. I'm like, okay, you don't realize that Kurt already thought through this and covered this extremely thoroughly, and it's in the Proprietarian Constitution. So I find myself just saying, it's in the Proprietarian Constitution, it takes care of it. So what I want you to see is that he's thought through things very, very thoroughly. He understands the world stage. He understands our situation in America. And what I love about this whole thing, Kurt, I mean, this is one of the best all-time, experiences I've ever had, even just listening to anyone about political topics or whatnot. I just love the picture you painted, that we are not the underdogs. We are not in a weak position. We are in a strong position. We absolutely can do this. We actually have multiple options. The only option that is bad is to be passive and let our enemies win.
Love you, brother. Well, let's hope we can get enough so that we don't. I mean, I'm willing to pull a Mao and go around, start in the South, and raise them up. I prefer not to. I prefer we scare the pants off the enemy enough to bring them to the table beforehand. But
yeah,
whatever. We're going to win one way or the other, because I'm not going to let it be any otherwise.
Yes. That's right. Well, love you too, brother. Thanks so much for doing this. We'll get this up as soon as we can. And
hey, John, thank you for all you do. Really,
hey.
Honestly, you are a gift from God.
Thank you so much. Great to hear that. And thank you for everything you do and all your hard work as well, Kurt.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.